One of the reasons you want to do a podcast, it's a little bit like a book. When you do a book, you're kind of seen as an expert because, well, not everybody writes a book. Well, now not everybody records a podcast. For every 2,000 blogs, there's one podcast. So many people think I need a big guest to validate my show. No, you're valid because for one person that's actually recording right now, there are 5 people that have had a microphone in a box sitting in their closet for 2 years saying, you know what, I probably should do that someday.
Hey Masters, welcome to another episode of Path to Mastery. And today we have a special guest on the podcast, Dave Jackson, who has what's called the School of Podcasting podcast. Dave, what's up, man?
Oh, Dave, glad to be here, man.
I'm glad to have you. It's interesting because you've been doing podcasting now since 2005. I mean, I don't even know if I knew what podcasting was in 2005. Never mind most of the other people out there.
Yeah, it was painful. It was, everybody thought you needed an iPod to listen to it. iTunes had just barely come on the scenes. That's why the original podcasters were all super geeks, because we were the people that had to figure it out. So it was a lot of fun.
Well, I love it. And, you know, I was turned on to you recently. Man, how did that happen? I was talking to the guy that actually does all my editing and audio work. We were talking about, you know, ways to kind of just make some changes, make it a little bit more dynamic. And he introduced me to your show. So yeah, I've listened to a couple episodes. It's phenomenal. So I just want to say, you know, great job. You have the award-winning Hall of Fame podcast. Well, that's what you are. You started in 2005. You also have a book, More Podcast Money. Is that what it's called? And you're a speaker at many of the events.
It's one of those things where I would talk to people who've been podcasting for a while, and not everybody wants to make money. Some people just want to get their message out, or they're just having fun with their friends. But there are some people that would like to earn some income. And I would ask them, I'm like, hey, you know, are you making any money with your podcast? And they would say, well, I haven't been approached by a sponsor yet. And I'm like, oh, there are so many other ways to make money with your podcast besides just sponsorship. And sometimes you have to go get the sponsor. You can't wait for them to come to you and all sorts of other things. So I wrote the book. I'm actually rewriting it right now because at the time, there's a website called Patreon, which is kind of this crowdfunding source that a lot of podcasters are finding success with. And Patreon didn't exist when I wrote the book. So I'm actually rewriting it to kind of include that chapter and also update some of the other things that are in the book. So that should be coming out hopefully by the end of the year.
Awesome. Good. Well, I love it. Look forward to seeing that. That was another reason I was recommended to talk to you, is about monetizing the podcast. So I did listen to that episode, which it just made a ton of sense. And then the other thing I listened to, which funny, was your episode on how to podcast the right way, kind of like the do's and don'ts of podcasting. And I'm listening to myself and thinking, man, I just make all these mistakes. And then I actually got a little bit nervous about doing this episode with you, man. It's kind of cool. I'm thinking like I'm talking to the podcast guru, like, right? Like my podcast is called Path to Mastery, and you're like the podcast master.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I know exactly how you feel. A friend of mine, her name is Mignon Fogarty. You might know her as Grammar Girl. She's been doing podcasting about as long as I have. She's been on Oprah. I mean, not many people can say that. And every time I have to email Mignon, I'm like, oh man, I'm emailing Grammar Girl. I'm like, I got to make sure I got all my commas in the right place, things like that. But no, it's all good, man. I'm ready to talk to you.
Hey Masters, I hope you enjoyed the new format. We wanted to get you right into the show. And now I want to share a few messages with you because listen, we have costs. We want to keep the show going. We have some sponsors, but I want to get you right back to the show. So first off, check out Vulcan7.com, guys. I talk about Vulcan7.com all the time. They have the data. They have a built-in CRM. They have a built-in dialer. You can send emails through the system. There's training. There's weekly webinars. Everything you need to be super, super successful. Guys, listen. If you're a carpenter and you want to be the best carpenter, you're going to go out there and you're going to get the best tools you can to be the best carpenter. This is the same thing in real estate. If you're in real estate and you prospect and you want the best tools, well, you're going to pay for the best tools. Get the best tools, my friends. Check out Vulcan7.com/path to mastery for a special offer. Vulcan7.com/path to mastery. Today's episode featured Dave Jackson, who is AKA the podcast coach. Okay. Killed it for us. Anybody listening, I know a lot of people reach out to me and say, hey, I'm thinking of starting a podcast. what would be your advice? My advice today would be to connect with Dave Jackson. Well, first, listen to this show and then connect with Dave Jackson. Easiest way, and you can get a discount, is go to schoolofpodcasting.com/path to mastery. Okay, Dave Jackson, he was phenomenal today. And finally, if you love podcasts, you're gonna love audiobooks, right? Audible is the largest resource of audiobooks. You can literally get yourself a free book by going to davidsfreebook.com and just get yourself a free audiobook. Right now, I'm listening to, what am I listening to right now? Oh, When Machines Do Everything. There's an interesting read. You can do When Machines Do Everything. It's all about the artificial intelligence and technology and the four giants, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, what they're doing out there. It's just an awesome book. Check that out. All right. So When Machines Do Everything, davidsfreebook.com. Check out these sites. It just helps us keep things going. And I would love if you would subscribe if you haven't done that already. Just subscribe to us so then you'll get your updates every week. And also, if you would be willing to give us a review, that super helps on Apple. The more reviews we have, the better guests we can get. And just, it's all about bringing value to you. Some big changes coming soon as well. You'll hear a little bit about it on this episode with Dave. We are thinking about rebranding and focusing a bit more on call reluctance. And it's, again, not just call reluctance, sales call reluctance, guys. All the different forms. It could be texting, social media, everything, making phone calls. We're going to cover that. Simply go to thereluctantsalesperson.net. Again, thereluctantsalesperson.net. October 3rd, 2 p.m. Eastern. We've got a phenomenal webinar just for you. You rock. Enjoy the rest of Dave Jackson. One of the reasons that I wanted to have this conversation is a lot of people reach out to me. We have an audience of a lot of real estate professionals, mortgage, insurance. I get a lot of random emails or texts sometimes if people have my number. Hey, I'm thinking of starting a podcast and, I'm just curious, like, where do I start? And in the beginning, Dave, going back a few years, I'd say, hey, give me a call. I'll talk to you for half an hour and kind of walk you through, some places to start. And then I had realized that all I'm really doing is the same thing I did when I first started, was I'm wasting my time and I'm wasting their time, because I'm not exaggerating. I probably spent 40 hours watching YouTube videos and doing all this research and all this stuff trying to put a podcast together before I was finally introduced to Podcaster's Paradise. And then once I just joined that community, and I had every tool I needed. So I kind of went away from like saying, okay, hey, give me a call and let's have this conversation, to go to this site and they'll show you everything. But I know it's deeper than that. So I want to get today, and we can talk a little bit about that as well, but I'd love to get into the why. So if people are reaching out to me and saying, hey, I'm a salesperson and I want to start a podcast, the goal is obviously to grow their business. Will a podcast help a salesperson grow their business?
Let's go this route. It can. It really depends, because what you end up doing is you build a relationship with your audience. And to do that, you have to deliver value. And so many people start off a podcast and they're thinking so much about them, which you should. If you're not doing a podcast that's going to help you reach your goals, well, then you won't do that. But on the other hand, you also have to really think about your audience. And so if I was doing a real estate podcast, I have to think about, okay, who is my target audience? Well, this is somebody, it might be the first-time home buyer, and they're nervous because, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money, and 30 years is a long time to pay a mortgage, and all these other things. And I'm sure you field the same questions over and over and over. Those questions, instead of rolling your eyes and going, oh, I can't believe I have to answer this again, that makes a great podcast episode, because now you're answering a question that you know that people are looking for, and you can still answer that question via email or however you want to do it. And you can say, I talked about this on my podcast. And then they're like, oh, wait a minute, you have a podcast? And you're like, yeah. And it's kind of interesting. One of the reasons you want to do a podcast, it's a little bit like a book. When you do a book, you're kind of seen as an expert because, well, not everybody writes a book. Well, now not everybody records a podcast. For every 2,000 blogs, there's one podcast. A lot of times people get worried because right now there's over 700,000 podcasts in Apple, but not all those are active. if you think about that, how many videos are on YouTube? It's still easier to get found as a podcaster than it is as a blogger or a YouTuber or things of that nature. And what you're going to do now is answer those questions. You're going to solve those problems that your target audience is going to, have. That then positions you as the expert. And when you say, oh, no, don't use this form, or don't use, this is the wrong company, it's the wrong type of company, you want to use this. Well, now you're going to save them time and money. And that then starts the law of reciprocity. I've done something nice for you. Now you probably want to do something nice for me. Like, I don't know, hire me as your real estate agent. And then I'm assuming you want to be known in your little neck of the woods. And so what you might do is start kind of like a little community section, like, hey, today we're going to talk about how to get your house ready for sale, or how to get your house appraised properly, and what to look for when you're hiring a company for appraisal. And also in our community calendar, we're going to talk about the new play that moved in down the street. Because now, if you think about it, I don't know about you, but in my area, we're down to one newspaper, and it's almost a pamphlet by the time you read it. There's not much going on in terms of local news. And it really doesn't take much to get local news. For me, there are a bunch of Facebook groups where people are putting in news and stuff like that, or go to the theater's website, whatever it is, just local news. And now you become kind of this hyper local expert. And so that people that maybe aren't even wanting to sell their house or buy a house will listen to, because I want to keep up with what's going on in my community. But now they know, hey, if you want to buy or sell a house, you got to go talk to Dave. That's the man right there. I listen to his podcast. So it's hyper niche, local, and then it's filled with value. And all you're doing is just kind of strutting your stuff that, hey, this is, I know when it comes to selling a house or buying a house or whatever you're doing in real estate, I'm the man or the woman, and you become then their best friend. I've had people say really strange things, like, I publish every Monday. And I've had people say, like, Dave, you're with me every Monday on the way to school with the kids, or on the way to the feed store. I had somebody say, Dave, I shower with you every Monday. And I'm like, that sounds a little weird, but I get your point. Okay. And that's the other thing. You don't have to have a super tight schedule, but I always say it really, really helps, because what happens is, for my instance, I publish on Monday morning. They then put you into their routine. And that's where it really starts to, every Monday they just fired up, and oh, there's Dave. And that thing of just going to their app and there you are, now you're trustworthy. I trust that you're going to be there. So if you can kind of share a little bit about yourself, and by that I don't mean like, hey, welcome to the podcast. Today I'm going to talk about French toast because I just love French toast. Well, that's not really what they tuned in for. But I try to illustrate things through personal stories. So an example of that might be, I did an episode where I was talking about how when you first start out, it's kind of hard, like anything else. You're flattening that learning curve. And so you're not going to have that many listeners when you first start out. So you need a lot of passion. And I said, for me, the passion you need is, at the time I had a stepson that was 16. And the minute I walked in the door, he was like, can we go driving? Can we go driving? Because that kid had one thing on his mind, and that was getting his license. And I said, so you need the passion of a 16-year-old wanting to get their license. I said, because that's what's going to push you through at the beginning when things are starting slowly. And I had so many of my listeners say, oh, I have one of those too. Oh, I just went through that. And I'm white knuckling it every time I get in the car because this kid can't drive, and things like that, which then just gives you a chance to interact with your audience and build that connection. Yeah. So that when they say, hey, I need a real estate person. Do you know anybody? Oh, man, you got to go talk to Dave.
Love it, man. Well, you really are good at this. You just answered like 5 questions I had in a row. So let's talk about, I think you said 700,000 podcasts and growing every day, right? Is that accurate?
Yeah, there are thousands. I had a friend of mine who's just uber nerdy. He can kind of tie into the back end. And he said last week there were almost 7,000 podcasts, brand new ones, released in Apple Podcasts.
I get it. And so let's say you are a professional, you understand, you want to bring value to your listeners or to your, say, sphere of influence, because in real estate, everything's based on your sphere of influence. How do you stand out? I mean, how do you even get noticed when there's that many podcasts out there?
Well, part of that is going to be just your personality. And this is one of the things that you have to do. Don't try to be somebody else. You mentioned Podcaster's Paradise, and so many people, and John's a great guy. I consider him a friend, but so many people started their podcast and it was like, whatever, librarians on fire, and I'm going to do a daily show. And they literally tried to do John's show. You're never going to out Lee Dumas, because it comes to him naturally. You're not going to out Dave Jackson, because I'm just being me. So you need to be you.
Authentic.
Yeah, you don't want to like, hey, welcome to the podcast, everyone. There's no big radio voice. I remember in the early days of podcasting, there's a guy, he's still doing a show. It's called Shrink Rap Radio. His name is Dr. Dave, and it's all about psychology and psychiatry and things like that. And Dr. Dave kind of sounds like this, welcome to the show, Shrink Rap Radio. But the cool thing about that is when you hear that voice, you instantly know it's Dr. Dave. For me, I am kind of goofy. I like to have fun when I podcast, so I try to mix in a little. My style I call is edutainment. I try to make it fun and educational, where some people might look at that and go, I don't know, I think that guy's a little too goofy. All right, well, that's fine. Go listen to my buddy Daniel J. Lewis. He's pretty much a just the facts kind of person. So the people that like you will like you, and the people that don't won't. And that's why so many people worry about, well, what if they don't like me? Well, they're not going to listen. And you have to be okay with that, because if you try to be everything to everybody, it's just not going to work. You're just going to be vanilla. But in terms of standing out, I always try to tell people, go listen to your competition, not to steal from them, but write down, oh, I liked this. I didn't like this. Okay, this might be cool. And then take that and tweak it now. Like, okay, this is a great idea, but how can we make this idea better? And that comes, one of my backgrounds is music. My other background is teaching. I taught in the corporate world for like 20 years, but that's all the Beatles did. The Beatles took Elvis and Little Richard and kind of put it together and came out with their sound. It was a little bit of rockabilly, a little rock and roll, and a Little Richard in there for the whoo kind of stuff. And that's what they did. And so go get inspired by some other people. And then bottom line, find out where your target audience is and ask them. If I had a secret Santa at work, if I was back in the corporate world and you have that thing where everybody puts their name in a bowl and you have to pull somebody out and you pull out the name and it's Howard. And you're like, oh, Howard's in accounting. I don't even work. I barely know this guy. What would I have to do? I'd have to go ask somebody in accounting, hey, what does Howard want for Christmas? And they'd be like, oh, he's really into, the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm like, oh, cool, I'll buy him a jersey. So the day comes, you do your gift exchange, and Howard's like, oh, man, this is awesome. This is one of my favorite players. That guy's ecstatic, and he wants you to be the Secret Santa next year because you took the time to find out what he wanted and then give it to him. And so when you do that with your podcast, people just go, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only person that needed that. And that's where if you kind of go niche, you're going to end up with a smaller audience, but it's going to be much more engaged. I had a client of mine, her son had autism, and she was just a Disney fanatic. And so she did a podcast called Special Mouse, and it was all about how to take people with special needs to Disney parks or to really any amusement park. And she didn't have a huge audience, but the people that found it were like, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only person going through this. So she had a really super engaged Facebook group, and she actually ended up getting a sponsor because there was somebody in Florida that specialized in transporting people with special needs. So you don't always have to have the 10 million downloads to get a sponsor if that's the way you want to go.
I mean, and you just gave us some great stuff. I mean, obviously starting with passion, my listeners know that, and we've talked about that before, bringing value, creating connection, obviously not expecting everyone to love you or like you. And we have to be okay with that, like you said, because the reality is if you put a message out there and 1,000 people hear it, 500 are going to love it and 500 are probably going to disagree, right? I mean, that's the reality. So what would you say to somebody listening? Like, let's say somebody says, okay, I have a niche. I want to get started. I'm ready to do this. What's going to be the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge will probably be getting over the sound of your voice. A lot of people really, I see people get stuck on that, and it's actually, there's science behind it. When you actually talk, you hear your voice through your ears, and this sounds kind of weird, you actually also hear your voice through your skull. In fact, if you put your fingers on your forehead and talk, you'll feel vibrations. And that's actually kind of like your skull is like the subwoofer. It's like all this extra bass. And so what happens then is when you record your voice and you play it back, now you're only hearing yourself through your ears. The technical term is bone conduction. There's no bone conduction going on. And so your voice sounds a little thin, might sound a little shrill to you depending on it. And I know some people like, is that how I sound? And I'm like, yep, it's not bad. It's just different. And I always ask them, I go, have you ever been on the phone and just having a normal conversation and somebody hang up on you and they go, no. And I'm like, well, then your voice isn't that bad. Don't worry about it. It's going to sound different. And then some people get really worried about, well, first they worry that nobody's going to listen.
Yeah.
That's always a worry. And then once they finally get an episode and they're getting ready to put it out there, then they're like, well, wait a minute. Somebody might actually hear this. And I'm like, well, that's good. But when you first start off, it's not going to be a ton of people. It's going to be your family and friends and things of that nature. It's going to take a little while to get that up. So don't let, oh my gosh, I'm going to be, all these people are going to hear it. Because when you first start, that's probably not going to be the case. In fact, when I record my podcast, I don't say things like, hey, everybody. Hey, you guys. I talk to one person. I go, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. And then when I go to events, if I'm talking at some place, I'll have people come up to me and they go, man, I love your podcast. I always feel like you're talking to me. And I go, that's because I am. It just makes it a little more intimate when you do that. Because you think about this, most of the time people are listening to this in the car alone on their way to work, or they're walking a dog and they got their earbuds in, things like that. So I always try to talk to one person, and that sometimes can also help the person that's worried about, oh, so many people are going to hear this and they might hate me or whatever. No, just think about that one person who really needs this information.
I love that. That's really good advice. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, it comes down to what we teach as well when it comes down to sales and getting over call reluctance. It's really about coming from contribution, right? If you're bringing a message out there that's going to help others, the reality is if it doesn't resonate with somebody, that's not your challenge, right? That's their challenge, right? If you're really coming from that place of, I want to bring service, I want to bring contribution, right? That said, though, should we be looking at, like, I've always done audio podcasts. I've done a couple videos, but I've never released them. Do you think it makes a difference if you're doing audio or video?
Well, video, let's go with audio first. The advantage of audio is I can listen to it in the car while I'm driving the kids to work, while I'm walking the dog, things like that, where video requires my undivided attention. In theory, if I'm doing something on video, it's a cooking show. It's something where I'm showing you how to do something. If you want to do a talking head, that's what I call that. It's not a derogatory term, but it's you talking into the camera. That's fine too, because it builds you as the brand. But I will say video can add just a lot more time, a lot more gear, because now you're talking about lighting and cameras and all sorts of other fun things. So right now, I think the majority of podcasts are audio, but it can be audio, it can be video. If we want to get our hyper nerd on, you can actually podcast a PDF. But start wherever you're comfortable with. So I know for video, a lot of people are like, oh, now I got to get my makeup on if I'm a female, and I got to get my hair done. And for guys, we got to shave and all that other stuff.
Yeah,
and so some people are like, oh, I don't really want to do that. Well, then don't. Start off with audio and then see if anybody says, have you ever thought of doing things on video? But there are people that will do a YouTube video and they'll record into their microphone that also then records the audio, and they'll repurpose it. So you've got the video now on YouTube for those people that want to watch. I'll take that exact same audio and put it out as a podcast. The thing you just want to avoid is you don't want to say things like, hey, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, this is what I'm talking about. Because when somebody listens to that in the podcast, they're like, no, I don't see anything. I'm walking the dog. I'm shopping for groceries. So you kind of want to be careful. If that's the plan, it's going to be a YouTube and I'm going to repurpose the audio. Try not to say things that are super visual or explain. You'll see in the upper right-hand corner, I have a chart here and you'll see where the sales are going from 0 all the way up to 10,000 in 6 months. You want to explain what you're looking at.
All right, that's really good advice. Yeah, and I hear a lot more recently about doing a video, and then, like you said, you can multi-purpose, or you can use it as video, you can use it as audio. So I keep hearing a lot more about that, which has kind of been on my mind, possibly about starting to do some videos. What about from my understanding, a lot of people will start a podcast and then they'll put a few episodes out. And they're not getting the traction that they thought they would get, and then they stop. Is that common, or how does somebody work through that, Dave?
It's very common. I think the last stat I heard is most people do 7 episodes, and then they quit. The reason for that is most people think a 15-minute podcast is going to take 15 minutes, and it's not. A 15-minute podcast, in my travels at least, when I record or I start tracking my time, I say it's 4-1. So if I'm going to do a 15-minute podcast, it's going to take me an hour. And people are like, how is that? You just talk into a microphone for 15 minutes. Okay, well, you have to figure out what you're going to talk about. For me, I actually write up a blog post. Why? Because that flushes out the idea. Now, I'm not going to read that blog post because nobody likes to be read to, because it sounds very boring when you read that. So I don't read my blog post. And if I was going to script it out, some people do. That's the great thing about podcasting. You can do it however you want. If you are going to use a script, just throw out punctuation and write down exactly like you talk, because we don't write like we talk and we don't talk like we write. So I actually do a blog post, and then I take that blog post, which helps me flesh out exactly what I'm trying to say, and I break it down to a couple bullet points, and then I just basically hit record, do my bullet points, and go from there. But that, again, that takes time. So then, unless I'm absolutely perfect, I might have said, let's go to crap, what's it called? Hold on, let me look at okay, that's going to get edited out. So unless you're perfect, you're going to have to do some editing. And then you basically upload it to your media host, which doesn't take long, but that's another thing. And then you hit post. So by the time you get done figuring out what you're going to do, recording it, editing it, and then posting it, congratulations, your 15-minute podcast just took you an hour. Now, there are parts of that you can outsource. You can outsource the editing and things like that, but it is going to take a little more time than you thought. So that's when you go, well, wait a minute, what if I do an hour-long interview? Yeah, that's going to take you about 4 hours. And you're like, wait, how is that? You just show up and ask a bunch of questions. It takes, 10 minutes to come up with some questions? Well, yeah, but if I'm interviewing an author on Monday, and what am I doing this week? I'm reading the book, because I want to know exactly where the conversation is going to go so I can ask the best questions to get the best value. There are things you can do like anything else. You can do it on the cheap, or you can do it wholeheartedly. But that, again, if you want to really have a great interview, you should probably know the answers before you even ask the question, because if you know the best answers, then you can ask the best questions, which brings the best value to your audience. So, okay, so the interview was 45 minutes, but it took me, 3 hours to read the book. So it's just one of those things that just takes a little more time. And that's where some people, Larry King is famous for going into interviews not knowing a thing about his guests. Well, he's also Larry King. He can get away with that. And that doesn't mean you have to read the whole book. Some people just skim areas and things like that. But you do want to know who your guest is. And so, again, it just, as you go through, it just seems like it takes more time. And I think a lot of people think it's going to take 15 minutes, not an hour. I thought it was going to take an hour, not 4. After 7 episodes, they're like, well, I'm up to, I always hate when I hear people say things like, well, I've only got 60 downloads and my background's in teaching. And I go, wait a minute, 60 downloads, that's 60 people. That is 3 classrooms. And when I was teaching, if you had 20 people in a classroom, you're like, I hope they all behave, because this could get a little tense in here. And that's 60 people that are listening to you in the age of AM, FM, satellite, Hulu, Netflix, HBO Go, Amazon, Xbox. There are all these things that can distract them. And they are choosing to listen to you. So it's not so much how many numbers. It's, in some cases, it's who. I do a little Northeast Ohio podcasters meetup, and I'm going to say I've had maybe a dozen people tops at that thing. But the one time we got together, there were 6 of us, and one of those guys works at the local TV station and got me on TV. So you never know who's listening. Don't underestimate the power of only 60 or only 20 or only 30, and just make it super easy for those people to share your show.
Masters, we are going to get you right back to the show. Listen, this really helps to keep this podcast going. So please, our sponsors, Vulcan7.com, for all the data you need for making phone calls, a dialer built in, a CRM built in, a calendar system. If you need data for expireds, for sale by owners, you want to pull your sphere of influence, check out Vulcan 7 for 2 weeks for only $49. Check out the service. If you love it, keep with it. Vulcan7.com/path to mastery. Listen, free books, okay? Who doesn't love a free book? If you love podcasts, you're going to love Audible. It's audio books. As a matter of fact, I would get yourself a copy of Secrets of the Millionaire Mind right now. Just go to davidsfreebook.com. Yep, they're going to ask you to sign up. But here's what you do. You sign up, And then you just set a reminder in your calendar. So if you don't want to stick with Audible, I don't know why you wouldn't, but if you don't want to, then just cancel before your card is ever charged. Okay, so you get, again, a free audiobook from Audible, davidsfreebook.com. And finally, putting together an amazing program webinar series on sales called Reluctance, which starts October 3rd. Just go to listnow.us to check it out. Anything you need to know about limiting beliefs, about call reluctance, fear of rejection, fear of success. We're covering them all, my friends. October 3rd, check it out. Listnow.us. You rock. You mentioned a few minutes ago bringing value to the audience, which is something that I took from listening to one of your back episodes, because I always thought about it as, well, hey, if like I've had Gary Vee on my show and other people like that. And I always thought, well, the benefit is I get Gary Vee on my show. I'm bringing value to my audience, or I'm actually getting more listeners because of that. But, you said it doesn't really work like that, right?
Well, for me, it's not the size of the guest that brings the value. It's the size of the value that brings the guest. You can put Gary Vee on a cooking show. He doesn't know anything about cooking. Now, Gary Vee for entrepreneurs, that makes sense. But the other thing, most of these people that are super ginormously big, they don't have time to share your episode. So if you're thinking this is what it takes for my show to be legitimate, and I'm not dissing Gary Vee. I love Gary Vee. I thought Crush It was a great book. But so many people think I need a big guest to validate my show. No, you're valid because for one person that's actually recording right now, there are 5 people that have had a microphone in a box sitting in their closet for 2 years saying, you know what, I probably should do that someday. You're already valid. You're already bringing value. It doesn't take a big guest.
I love that.
Yeah. I had a guy on my show, and I don't want to say he was unheard of. He might have been not as known in the podcasting space, but he was a king in the horse world. He runs a website called horseradionetwork.com. He does 16 podcasts. He does it full time, and they're all about horses. Every single podcast is about different breeds and different things in horses. And I found this guy at Podcast Movement, which is an event for podcasters. They had like extra time in a meeting of something. And the one moderator said, Glenn, why don't you stand up and just tell us a couple tips about how you run your website? And I could not wait for this guy to shut up because I had my business card. And I said, the minute this guy shuts up, he is coming on my show, because everything he was just saying, I was like, oh, this is gold. So I brought him on my show, and everybody was like, holy cow, wait, what? Who is this guy? And I'm like, it's Glenn the Geek. He's been on my show 5 times, and he knows that anytime he comes across something that will help you grow your audience, or he's all about sponsors and things like that, all he has to say is, hey, Dave, I got something. Can I share it on my show? And I'm like, here's my scheduling link. Let's make this happen. So he's a guy that's the ultimate. He brings the value. And he's now a verb. One of his strategies is he will go to an event. So in his case, he went to the top horsing event and said, hey, I want to be your official podcast of the event. And here's what I want to do. I want to interview all your speakers. I want to interview all your sponsors. And all I need is a booth. And I'll promote the heck out of your event because I have your target audience. And they went, okay, sounds like a deal. Well, what did Glenn do? Well, he got to interview all the speakers. So now he's growing his network. And then he interviewed all the sponsors, and all the sponsors were like, wait, tell me about your thing again. He's like, oh, I have a network of people. It's all horse people. And they're like, well, how much does it cost to sponsor your podcast? And then what he does is he has all the sponsors. He gives them the code to put the player on their website. So not only is he promoting their product, they're promoting his product. Stuff like that. I was just like, whoa, this is brilliant information. And so now that people will say, hey, Dave, I'm going to this event. You're not going to believe it. And I go, what? And they're like, I'm the official podcast of the event. And I'm like, wow, that's cool. How'd that happen? They go, oh, it's easy. I just Glenn the Geek did. So he's now a verb. He's a great example of bringing value in not so much a big name. I mean, I've had John Lee Dumas. I've had Pat Flynn. I've had Jordan Harbinger. And all these guys are huge in podcasting. And they brought value as well. But Glenn was the guy that people are like, whoa, where did this come from?
I get it. Well, yeah. And, having Gary and other people like that, I've had John Acuff and some other big time authors. Yeah. But the reality is if you have like for me, my podcast is Path to Mastery. So it's salespeople. Everybody's looking to increase their skills. So it was good. We talked about social media and how social media can help with sales and things like that. That did bring value. But I've had other guests that they shared stuff. They were big name guests, but it wasn't really stuff that my audience cared about. You know what I mean? So if you're a real estate agent and your audience is home buyers, then you need to have content that's relevant to home buyers, or what do they care about your podcast, right?
Right. And I've seen people do that. I had a friend of mine that wanted to drive business to his wife's real estate business. And he started a podcast because he thought everybody was doing it. He started a show where he interviewed other entrepreneurs. And I said, how's it going? He goes, well, it's not really driving any business to my wife's business. And I'm like, well, number one, are you even mentioning it in the show? And he really wasn't a whole lot. And number two, I said, do people that want to buy or sell a house, do they want to listen to entrepreneurs? I go, I don't think so. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. So you have to make sure the why, here's why I'm doing this podcast. Here's my target audience now. What content overlaps my goals and their entertainment value, or education, whatever it is you're doing. And it can work. I mean, I've been doing this a while. Way back on episode 373, I interviewed a guy named Jason Hartman, and he's been in real estate forever. And he attributed $10 million in sales just to his podcast because his audience was much better educated. They knew exactly what they wanted. So it cost him less time to educate his audience. He was getting people that are like, no, I know exactly what I want to do. How do I do this? I'm looking for this kind of thing. And the other thing is he used to be the real estate guy on AM radio. You wake up 10:30, it's, welcome to the real estate hour or whatever it was. And he said, why would I spend hundreds of dollars a week to be on the radio except to feed my ego when I can spend $30 a month on a podcast and reach the world? Yeah. So it can definitely work in real estate.
With regards to, something I talked about before we started recording, my podcast started based off of the book I wrote, the Sales Playbook. And it was really to promote the book in the beginning and find other people that want to increase sales. Although it's a lot of real estate agents, it's kind of a general topic. So recently, another one of your episodes I was listening to, I kind of want to figure out how I niche it the right way, more focused on call reluctance, right? I think that's what I'm really effective at. That's what my book's about. How does let's say somebody's listening to this, a couple of our listeners are listening, they have a podcast, but they're not really generating the result. How do they do that without trashing what they've already built? Is that possible?
Yeah, you can treat it like the Titanic is not a good example. I was trying to think of a big boat that wouldn't turn quickly, but you can spin your yacht and it's going to take a while to turn because that thing doesn't turn on a dime. So you can kind of do it slowly and people won't even notice that they turned. Or you can do a 360 and you're going to lose a few people over the bow and that's okay. The great thing is it's your podcast. I had a podcast. I started off originally in 2005 for musicians, and it was called the Musicians Cyber Cooler. And that's because back in 2005, we called the internet cyberspace. So it was the Musicians Cyber Cooler where musicians come to trade advice because the whole point was it was like a water cooler. And the problem is I had to explain the show title. So that's number one, make it obvious. Plus, cyber became synonymous with the word sex. So everything was like cyber sex. I'm like, all right, we need to lose the word cyber. So then it was a musician's cooler. And I had a big picture of a water cooler as the artwork, and people still didn't get it. They're like, wait, is this like a wine cooler thing or what's? And I'm like, so I finally changed the name to the Marketing Musician, where musicians, come to trade advice or whatever it was. But that's when people are like, oh, it's a marketing show for musicians. So you can change it anytime you want. All you have to do is just, instead of relating everything to real estate agents, just make it a little more, whatever it is, the topic you want to talk about. And just realize that some people will go, well, I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine that did a podcast about podcasting, and he after a while was like, okay, I think I can help people outside of podcasting. And he just openly said, he goes, I'm still occasionally going to talk about podcasting, but I think there's more out here. And he changed the name of his show and expanded he actually did the opposite. He went a little more broader. And that's one of the beauties of podcasting. It's your show. There's no group of people that have to approve it. You can do whatever you want and make it what you want. Tell me about call reluctance. What does that actually mean?
It's sales reluctance, right? It's picking up the phone. It's sending the right email. It's or sending an email, period, or even sending somebody a text, or maybe walking up to somebody in public and letting them know you're in real estate or sales for that matter, right? It's any form of reluctance that's holding you back from taking an action. So in my book, we talk about all those forms, of Call Reluctance. I have a course coming out called The Reluctant Salesperson. And it just kind of clicked after listening to one of your episodes that maybe my podcast should be more focused on that, right? Like branded to the reluctant salesperson. And I don't know the answer. Or maybe it's a second. Maybe I do a second show, right? Maybe I keep this and then do it twice a week instead of once a week.
You see, I would keep this show. And the reason for that, everything you just mentioned, does that not apply to real estate people?
Oh, it does.
Yeah. So I've seen authors that will do this. They'll have multiple books that are primarily on the same subject, and they'll change the podcast name and the artwork to match whatever book they're promoting because it's still the same thing. And in reality, your target audience probably still, if it's about sales or let's say it was about running or, whatever your topic is, it's still kind of the same topic. It's just maybe approaching it from a different level. So maybe one year it's the reluctant salesperson, and then maybe next year it's the efficient salesperson. And now you're talking about tools and staying focused and things like that. And then the next year it's something else about sales. Those are all going to apply value to your audience. So if you think about it, here in the States, we had Kentucky Fried Chicken. And when people actually started to think, well, maybe that's not the healthiest thing on the planet, they went, that's going to be a problem because everything was like, oh, avoid fried food. So what they do, they changed their name to KFC, hoping that you won't figure out that the F stands for fried. And they changed their branding. They repainted the building or something like that. It's the same food. It's the same place. It's the same address. It's just a rebrand. And you can do that with your podcast. You can change the name. You can change the artwork, maybe change the description. But in the same way that KFC is still at 123 Main Street, if we're going to get our geek on, your podcast address stays the same. Behind the scenes, the thing that apps are looking at to get the latest content can stay the same because nobody sees that. Sometimes we worry about that because let's say your show was Libsyn.com. I know that's who you're hosting through. Yeah. Libsyn.com/Path to Mastery. And now you changed it to, hey, I'm going to do a new show called The Reluctant Salesperson. Okay, but my feed is still Libsyn.com/Path to Mastery. I've got a simple test. Dave, what's one of your favorite podcasts? Name one.
Bigger Pockets.
Okay, great. What is Bigger Pockets feed?
I'm guessing.
Exactly. You have no
Bigger
idea.
Pockets. Yeah.
So that's the whole thing. So people worry that, oh, my old RSS feed still shows the old brand. Nobody sees that. Apps see that and robots see it, but somebody don't. So it's really easy to rebrand your show and change. And you can definitely do it.
You know, it's funny. I just had Harv Eker. I don't know if you know who he is. I just had him on, and it was kind of a challenging episode because I don't want to single him out, but they wouldn't do the episode unless like they sent me a list of questions. Like, these are the questions we want you to ask. And it's funny because my wife listened to it after and she's like, dude, that just didn't even sound like you were having fun.
No.
You know, it's kind of funny how sometimes that happens.
Well, I would look at that and say, I would look at those questions and go, are those the questions my audience would ask if they were sitting?
Exactly.
And if they're not, I'm like, not a fit. Sorry.
Yeah, no doubt. But yeah, that's the reality. What we talked about earlier is bringing the value to your audience.
Yeah.
Because is that going to bring the value to my audience? So that's such a great point.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a control freak. I actually edit most of my shows. And that's if I do an interview, I listen to the question and then I listen to the answer. And the first thing I ask myself is, did they answer the question? Because some people that do a lot of interviews, boy, you just ask them a question and you pull their chain and off they go to the races. So the first thing I ask is, did they answer the question? And then the second thing I say, did that answer bring value to my audience? And if it doesn't, it's gone. And then I go to the next question. But hopefully I've done my homework. I'm asking the right questions and I'm getting the right answers. So that's where that show prep kind of comes into play.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, if I ask somebody, has there ever been a time when you wanted to blank, blah, blah, but you didn't, whatever it is, and they go, no, I've never been in that situation. That's coming out. That doesn't bring any value. I had a guy once, he had audio and video experience. I said, just so you know, most of my audience doesn't play in video. So we're not going to probably spend a lot of time in the video area. And he was like, all right, cool. And then like halfway through, he went into the video area and not only went into the video area, but like went knee deep into and I'm like, the whole time I'm just letting him talk. And I'm like, all right, this is going on the floor because this is not what you're here for. And I did. He didn't even notice. I cut it out and kept the good stuff.
You know, if somebody is interested, like in starting this, obviously, I'm going to go back to where we started this interview. The mistakes I made was I invested way too much time trying to do it on my own, trying to figure things out, watching YouTube videos, and then hitting a wall because it only brought me so far. And I joined this network. You also have a network. This is what you do. You're also AKA podcast coach, correct? So if somebody's interested in starting a podcast, I would personally recommend they connect with you.
Well, I appreciate that.
So how does somebody do that? How does somebody connect with you?
The website is schoolofpodcasting.com. That's where all my information is there. But if you, I'm going to set up a special link just for listeners of this show. If you go to schoolofpodcasting.com/path to mastery, that will take you to a special page. And if you use the coupon code mastery, that will save you 20% off.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate that. That's for sure. What would somebody, I mean, what does it cost? What do you think, like somebody thinking about this, what should they be thinking about investing if they want to start a podcast?
I usually tell people it's the price of an Xbox. So if I'm doing a solo show, if it's just me and people go, oh, you're making that up, you're looking at about $70. Literally, that's it. You buy a microphone, you plug it into your computer, and you can actually start that way. Now, if you want an intro and outro music and things like that, okay, tack on another 60. You're going to need a piece of artwork. Okay, well, there's another $50. There are people that will charge you $400 for artwork, but I have found really good artists that don't charge an arm and a leg. A lot of the stuff you do once, you buy the microphone once, you get the artwork once, you get your intro and outro once. And then from there, it's just whatever you're going to spend, $15, $20 a month. It's really not that much. And that's why the people I love to find are people that are doing the Saturday morning dentist or the, Mr. Gene, the green machine. And he's talking about plants and flowers on Saturday. He's spending $500 a week to be on the radio. And I'm like, how'd you like to spend $30 a month to reach the world?
Yeah.
So,
no doubt.
Yeah, so it doesn't cost a lot. And when you get into things like co-hosts and things like that, it gets a little more expensive, but it's typically somewhere between $100 and $500 to get started.
All right.
And then $30 a month to keep going.
I'm thinking, just listening to you, I remember when I first started, I bought this ATR microphone. Mm-hmm. I'm still using it. Same microphone. I think I paid like $80. Thing's a beast. You know what I mean? I've been using it 3 years. And it sounds great. And then I know some other people that went out and spent they got this whole setup. They spent like $500-$600 on a microphone and this fancy microphone case. And then they didn't even do anything with it, So yeah, I would say just get started, right? That's the key.
It really is. I mean, I'm talking into a microphone right now that costs $300. Sitting right next to me is the ATR 2100 and it costs, like you said, $80. Is there $220 difference in this? No, it really doesn't sound that much better. It sounds a little better, but not a ton. And the only reason I use this microphone is I worked with a company and they sent me one. So otherwise, it'd still be on my ATR 2100. Or if you're across the pond, it's a little harder to get. So I always tell people go with the Samson Q2U. Same microphone, it's just a different manufacturer.
Well, we'll have to see how it sounds then once this episode's released. We'll see the difference. All right, man. Well, hey, again, I just want to say I appreciate it. What could I do better? How did I do today? What do you think I could do better?
No, you're good, man. Let me think about this. The only thing, here's my side of the fence, and I think this is just me. This isn't you. Every time I got done, I was like, I need to shorten my answers. Because I think after the first one, you said, wow, you just answered like 5 of my questions. And I was like, oh, that's probably a bad thing. And I'm like, I need to make shorter answers so that you can ask more questions. So that's just me. That was my feedback on my own self. But no, I thought it was good, man. I'll put it that way. Here's another thing that you do that a lot of people don't is when I was in the middle of an answer, you just let me go. Some people are, again, the show is all about them so much that they want to interject, or my favorite is they will me too it and then leave it in, because I'll me too. And what I mean by that is somebody will say, well, I think the Audio Technica 100 is one of the best microphones. And they're like, oh, I love that thing, blah, 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 blah. Well, okay, you're just reinforcing the point that person one said. Do we need to hear that point twice? And sometimes I'll cut that out. Sometimes I'll leave it in. But I hear a lot of people that they'll restate what the person just said. And I'm like, either A, that person isn't saying things very clear, or why are you restating it? It's like you have to digest it, and it's kind of like, ugh.
Well, people do that in conversation too all the time.
Yeah.
In sales, it's like that's a common thing.
Yeah. So it's kind of fun. And the other thing that you didn't do that I hear a lot of people do is you asked like a open-ended question, where some people will leave an open, like they'll say, well, how did it feel to go on your first sales call? And instead of just leaving like that and have you go, wow, it's been a while. What they'll do is go, and then they'll jump in because you're trying to figure out the question. And I don't know if they don't know that you can always cut out dead air. When they'll go, well, were you afraid or were you nervous? Were you confident? And they'll start giving them multiple choice. And then the person will go, actually, I was kind of nervous. And I'm like, if you just shut up, let them come up with the words, because you're giving them an easy out. And you don't do that, which was great. You've been doing this a while,
I'm trained as a recruiter too. So I recruit for Keller Williams Realty. So it's all listening, my friend, as you know. Yeah. It's funny. The reason I, thinking about what I said with the questions is because one thing I like to do with episodes is I'll listen to them after. And I'm always thinking, okay, based on what he's saying, am I listening because I'm going to ask the next right question? And sometimes I get it and sometimes I don't. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you're
absolutely.
Listening and you're like, okay, now I know. And then sometimes you're like, crap, I missed it. I should have asked that question. So that's why I'm always writing questions. So I have 2 notepads. I think, actually, I might have got that from you having 2 notepads. Yeah. I used to have 1.
Well, no, there are people. And again, I consider John Lee Dumas my friend, but he had his format where he kind of asked the same questions. And there were people that are like, oh, that's the formula. I'll do that. And I had one guy literally ask the same questions, like they were taking John's show verbatim. And he got to the, I forget what question 3 was, like, tell me a moment when things failed or something like that. And I said, you do know you're doing John's show, right? And he goes, what are you talking about? And I finally point, I go, the next one is what's your aha moment, right? And he's like, well, no, it's not his show, though. This is different. I'm like, no, it's not. And what happens, though, is people will have their list of questions that this is kind of where I want to go. And somebody would say something like, something super serious or whatever. And they'll be like, I got my first job there and I was doing great. But at the same time, my mom died of cancer. And then they'll say, great. What was your aha moment? They're just on to the next question. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, it's like, and I've always said, because I've been in those before where they're just waiting for me to shut up so they can ask the next question on the list. And I swear the next time I get into one of those, I'm going to say something like, you have to deliver value. Because I remember one time I shot a man for snoring once and, that wasn't very valuable. And just to see if they even catch it, because I swear that they're not listening to a word I say.
So true, my friend. So true.
But yeah, your recruiting background would definitely come in handy as an interviewer.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it definitely helps create some, I'm okay with some silence here and there. All right. So for you guys, listen, schoolofpodcasting.com/path to mastery. Dave Jackson will help you with whatever you need. And Dave, a final question. I mean, we've jumped around a bit. What's the one thing that the people listen to this episode today? What do you want them to take? What's the one thing people should be walking away from this episode with?
Just realize, you talk about the reluctant salesperson. It's the reluctant podcaster, and they think nobody's going to listen to me, or I'm not going to be any good at it, or things like that. And just realize you can actually really impact people. I had a guy email me once, and he said, look, I just want to let you know I was in a really bad place. He goes, my best friend of like 20 years had been killed in a car accident. He goes, I just lost my job and I was pretty sure I had cancer. And he goes, and I had decided that Halloween was my favorite day of the year. And on Halloween 2017, I decided I was going to kill myself. He goes, then I listened to your podcast and I heard you say that sometimes having a podcast can give you a purpose. And he said, so I decided, well, I'll start a podcast. And he goes, and you know what? I've developed a whole community around me now. And he goes, obviously, I need to talk to some people if I was really thinking about that. But he goes, I just want to let you know, you saved my life with podcasting because I now have a purpose. I've got a community and I don't want to kill myself anymore. So I did not start podcasting to save people's lives. I started podcasting because I'm a bit of a geek. I have a teaching background and I love to help people. And so that was the one that about made me fall out of my chair and cry. I just couldn't believe it. So you can really impact people with a podcast.
Well, thanks for sharing that. A great way to wrap this up, man. I just want to say I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Masters, I just want to thank you sincerely for supporting me in the podcast. And listen, before you move on, I know you're ready to get to what's next. Please give us a review. It helps tremendously. You can also subscribe. Just go to stayrelevant.biz. That's it, stayrelevant.biz. You can subscribe to the podcast there so you get the update every week. You get your new episode and you can leave a review. Also, if you're thinking about launching a podcast, people reach out to me on a pretty much a weekly basis asking me about starting a podcast. Best way to do that is to check out David Jackson's School of Podcasting. If you want, there's a 20% discount code. Just go to schoolofpodcasting.com/mastery and you can get yourself a 20% discount code. So check that out. David's free book. You've probably heard of that 10,000 times. So just go to davidsfreebook.com. Get yourself a free book on Audible. You're never charged. What do you got to lose? Nothing. And then finally, guys, health and nutrition, as you know, is number one to me with triathlons. I've been super fit since I started working out at 17. Never stopped. All the best health and nutrition products you can get, from vitamins, protein powder, energy bars, food bars, whatever you need, it's all there. livelongersmarter.com. Check out AdvoCare and try out the Spark. You're going to absolutely love the Spark. Again, listen, just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Just so appreciate you investing this time. And I hope you have a phenomenal rest of your day and enjoy on your path to mastery.